Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to take a deep and serious look at one of the most dramatic and sensitive developments unfolding in Eastern Europe, a situation that could reshape the political future of an entire country. Belarus, long known for its tightly controlled system of power, is now facing growing signs that its own security forces may be turning against the very regime they once protected. For decades, the Belarusian government relied heavily on loyalty from its security apparatus. The police, internal troops, intelligence services, and special units formed the backbone of regime stability. These forces were not just law enforcers, but political tools used to suppress dissent, intimidate opposition, and maintain absolute control over society. However, recent signals suggest that this foundation of loyalty is no longer as solid as it once was. Reports, leaks, and unusual behavior within the security forces indicate deep internal cracks. What was once a unified wall of obedience now appears fractured, uncertain, and increasingly unstable. To understand why this shift matters, we need to understand the role security forces play in authoritarian systems. In such regimes, power does not depend on popular support. Instead, it depends on fear, control, and the willingness of armed institutions to follow orders without question. Once that obedience weakens, the entire system becomes vulnerable. Belarus has experienced waves of public unrest before, especially during and after disputed elections. In those moments, security forces acted decisively, often violently, to restore order. Protesters were beaten, detained, and silenced. At the time, it appeared that the regime had complete control over its enforcers, but time changes everything. Prolonged pressure, economic hardship, international isolation, and moral fatigue can erode even the most disciplined forces. Many members of the security services are ordinary citizens themselves. They have families, financial worries, and personal beliefs that do not always align with political orders. One of the most telling signs of change has been the rise in reported refusals to carry out certain orders. While such refusals may be isolated, even a small number can signal a deeper problem. In authoritarian systems, even minor disobedience can spread quickly if others see that punishment is inconsistent or limited. There have also been reports of increased resignations and early retirements within key security units. Officially, these departures are often explained as routine or personal decisions. Unofficially, they point to dissatisfaction, fear of future accountability, and loss of faith in leadership. Another significant factor is the generational divide within the security forces. Older commanders may remain loyal out of habit, ideology, or personal benefit. Younger officers, however, grew up in a different information environment. They are more exposed to global media, alternative viewpoints, and social networks that challenge state narratives. This generational shift matters because younger personnel often handle frontline operations. They interact directly with civilians. They see the consequences of force. Over time, repeated exposure to internal repression can create moral conflict, especially when those being targeted are neighbors, friends, or relatives. Economic pressure is also playing a major role. Sanctions, declining trade, and economic stagnation affect everyone, including security personnel. While elites may be insulated, lower and mid-level officers feel the strain. When salaries lose value and benefits shrink, loyalty becomes transactional rather than ideological. At the same time, the regime's increasing dependence on fear creates its own problems. When leadership rules primarily through intimidation, it sends a clear message to its own forces. Loyalty is demanded, not earned. This can generate resentment and quiet resistance within the ranks. Another critical issue is trust. Authoritarian leaders often fear coups and betrayal, leading them to rotate commanders, limit information sharing, and encourage internal surveillance. While meant to prevent rebellion, these tactics can actually weaken cohesion and morale within security institutions. In Belarus, there are growing signs that internal trust is breaking down. Security units reportedly monitor each other. Commanders are cautious in meetings. Orders are sometimes vague, designed to protect those at the top rather than provide clear direction. This creates confusion and hesitation at lower levels. Hesitation is dangerous for authoritarian regimes. When a crisis erupts, leaders rely on rapid, decisive action. If security forces hesitate, question orders, or wait for confirmation, control can slip away in critical moments. The influence of external examples cannot be ignored either. Security personnel in Belarus have observed events in other countries where regimes collapsed after security forces refused to act against the public. These examples serve as powerful reminders that loyalty is a choice, not a destiny. There is also the issue of future accountability. Many officers are increasingly aware that political systems can change suddenly. Actions taken today may be judged harshly tomorrow. This fear of legal or social consequences can discourage participation in repression. Some security members reportedly try to minimize their involvement. Others seek transfers to less visible roles. A few even quietly assist activists or leak information. While these actions may seem small, collectively they weaken the regime's control. The leadership, aware of these risks, attempts to reinforce loyalty through propaganda and rewards. Loyal units are praised publicly. Benefits are selectively distributed. However, such measures often deepen divisions between favored and unfavored groups, increasing internal tension. The use of ideological language has also intensified. Security forces are told they are defending the nation from chaos, foreign influence, and internal enemies. Yet, when reality does not match rhetoric, credibility erodes. Another important dimension is the relationship between security forces and the general population. In the past, fear created distance. Now, prolonged repression has created bitterness on both sides. This makes reconciliation difficult and places security personnel in an increasingly hostile environment. When officers feel isolated from society, they may cling to authority, but when they begin to feel isolated from leadership as well, their position becomes unbearable. This psychological pressure can push individuals toward neutrality or quiet defiance. Communication within the security forces has also changed. Informal networks, encrypted messaging, and private discussions allow grievances to spread more easily. While open dissent remains rare, shared frustration builds collective awareness. The regime's response to perceived disloyalty often worsens the situation. Arrests of officers, public dismissals, and harsh punishments send a message of fear, but fear alone cannot restore genuine loyalty. It only ensures compliance until the moment it fails. History shows that regimes often fall not because of massive rebellion, but because security forces stand aside at critical moments. They do not need to join protesters, they only need to refuse to intervene. In Belarus, the possibility of such a moment is no longer unthinkable. Political tension remains high, economic uncertainty persists, public dissatisfaction simmers beneath the surface. In such an environment, the stance of security forces becomes decisive. If divisions continue to deepen, leadership may attempt more drastic measures. This could include further purges, restructuring units, or increasing reliance on a smaller circle of trusted forces. Such moves may provide short-term control but increase long-term instability. Another risk is fragmentation. When security forces split into loyal and skeptical factions, coordination collapses. This can lead to confusion, accidental clashes, or paralysis during crises. The international dimension also matters. External pressure, diplomatic isolation, and messaging aimed at security forces can influence behavior. When officers feel the world is watching, they may act more cautiously. At the same time, external support for the regime can embolden hardliners. This creates internal conflict between those who see survival through repression and those who see survival through restraint. The future path is uncertain. Security forces may ultimately remain loyal. The regime may successfully suppress dissent once again. Or a tipping point may be reached where obedience gives way to inaction. What is clear is that the balance of power is shifting. The assumption of absolute loyalty can no longer be taken for granted. This alone changes calculations at the highest levels of power. For citizens, this moment is both hopeful and dangerous. Hopeful because cracks in repression open space for change. Dangerous because instability can bring unpredictable consequences. For security personnel, the situation is deeply personal. Every decision carries risk. Obedience risks future accountability. Resistance risks immediate punishment. Neutrality may be impossible. In the end, the fate of the regime may depend not on speeches or laws, but on individual choices made in moments of pressure. Choices made quietly, without cameras or headlines. Belarus now stands at a crossroads. The actions of its security forces will shape what comes next. Whether they choose continued loyalty, cautious distance, or silent refusal will determine the country's direction. This situation reminds us that power is never absolute. Even the strongest systems rely on human cooperation. When that cooperation weakens, change becomes possible. As events continue to unfold, watching the behavior of Belarusian security forces will be crucial. Their movements, statements, and silences will reveal more than any official announcement. The story is still being written, and the world is watching closely, waiting to see whether the forces that once upheld the regime will ultimately become the reason it can no longer stand.